We have lots to talk about in today's video, including the latest trade talk around the NHL, focusing today on Toronto, Montreal, Seattle, and Columbus. Plus, we have news from the NHL waiver wire. Some more news today as well regarding David Pastrnak being benched by the Boston Bruins. And, of course, the Bruins seem to be rallying back with back-to-back shutouts, and the Kraken are going the opposite way after being shut out in back-to-back games as well. We'll discuss all the latest around the league coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. We're going to get started first with news from the waiver wire. Yesterday, the Vancouver Canucks had placed centerman Nils Aman on waivers, and he has in fact cleared. I speculated yesterday that he might be a good pickup for some teams, given the fact that a lot of teams are looking for depth at the center position, and he's a decent option. Now, I think that the deterrent here that kind of stopped teams from maybe doing that is he does have another year on his contract. So it's not a lot of money. It's under $1 million. It's a contract that can be fully buried if things didn't work out, assuming he clears waivers, of course, and which is what the Canucks are doing here at the moment. So it's certainly, it's good for Vancouver because they get to keep this guy in the organization, even though they didn't find room for him on the roster right now. Of course, Dakota Joshua is on his way back. But as time goes on, the Canucks have had their ups and downs this year. They're probably going to want this guy at some point to have another opportunity to kind of, grab a roster spot. So I think long term is good for Vancouver. A little surprising that it doesn't affect, doesn't get picked up. But at the same time, the other can keep in mind as well, and I've said this numerous times, some people don't quite grasp the concept, but when you clear waivers, it doesn't mean that it won't lead to a trade. And some people will always say, well, why would somebody trade for a player when they can get him on waivers and not have to give up any assets? And the problem is that some teams don't want to take the chance that he's not going to clear, right? So they'll be like, well, we wouldn't mind having him, but we don't necessarily want him on our NHL roster. Well, now he's cleared waivers. So he can go to the American Hockey League, and then if he was traded, they could put him directly into their minor league affiliate and then call him up later. So he's already cleared. So it kind of creates some flexibility that way. And a lot of teams, we know, don't have a lot of roster space. They don't have a lot of cap space. So in order to make a trade, maybe they have a player that they'd rather get a fresh start for, and they do a swap that way. So they can move an asset and bring another guy like him in. So it's kind of like a swap. You need something to go out in order to bring in, right? So there is that concept as well. So we'll see what happens with him. For right now, he'll likely be reassigned by the Canucks, and we'll kind of go from there. But he is the type of player that a lot of teams are looking for. So I'm a little bit surprised in a way that he wasn't picked up. Now, some other news around the league today. The Avalanche have activated Arturi Lehkonen. That's going to be huge for them. Obviously, they're missing a lot of people right now. To get Lehkonen back is a tremendous pickup. Obviously, he's been out for a significant period of time. So Lehkonen's return has caused them to put some players down to the minors. Now, some of this could just be paper transactions, but they probably all won't be recalled. But they've sent Nikolai Kovalenko, Nikita Prashov, and Ivan, I think he goes by Ivan. Hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I know I've heard some broadcasters say Ivan, but I'm pretty sure it's Ivan. So all three of those guys get sent to the minors. I would suspect one or two will likely be recalled in time for their next game. But a lot of teams, of course, with players that don't need waivers, or that have recently cleared, sometimes do paper transactions to the minors to free up cap space on their off days. Just allows them to accumulate more space towards the deadline, so they can add more at a later time. It's an interesting day as well, as I mentioned, interesting weekend overall of NHL action. The Boston Bruins seem to be you could kind of say they're back. Like they kind of getting their act together here. They've had back-to-back wins this weekend. But it's not like they're, beating like top teams here, and they weren't exactly the prettiest wins. But the main thing is they get the job done, and they get back-to-back shutouts. They shut out the Philadelphia Flyers on Saturday, then they follow that up with a shutout of the Seattle Kraken here tonight. So for the Bruins, of course, that's going to help, get some points, get some out of the basement of the Atlantic Division. It's hard to imagine I know it's early, but the fact that they were even in the basement at all, a lot of people are saying maybe this is finally the, I don't want to call it the demise, but the drop-off of the Bruins that we've been waiting for some time, given the fact that the team has lost some, key talents, gotten older, etc., And, here we are. Suddenly they bounce right back after a tough stretch of games. But the more interesting story there that came out of that game against the Seattle Kraken is that David Pastrnak did not play at all in the third period. Was creating a lot of questions throughout the remainder of the game. And we found out afterwards from head coach Jim Montgomery that was not injury related at all. That was a coach's decision. So that's bound to spark a lot of debate and conversations. Of course, we know Montgomery is not afraid to, preach tough love or to go after the top guys on the team if they're not playing well. Now, I only seen bits and parts of the game. I didn't see the whole thing start to finish. I only get to see a little bit of the first and second. So I am not sure exactly, what was going on there to see what happened with Pastrnak. But certainly, we've seen him yell at Brad Marchand on the bench. We've seen him call out Pastrnak last year in the playoffs, and Pastrnak responded. That's the last time that we've seen anything, I wouldn't call it controversial, but, anything that was public with Pasta was in the playoffs against the Leafs. He specifically called him out saying he needed more from him late in that series, and look what happened. He gave him more and scored the series clinching goal in Game 7 and allowed the Bruins to win that series and go on to the next round. So I don't really think this is going to be a huge story. I know I've seen some people online saying, cue up the Pastrnak rumors. I don't think that's going to happen. David Pastrnak is too important to that team. There's no way that it's going to lead to him leaving. If anything, I don't think that they're ready for a coaching change. I don't think that the reason for the play not being great this year is really on Monty, but they would certainly move on from Monty faster than they would trade Pasta. So I don't really think this is going to cue up any rumors for Pasta's side, but obviously if things got to be, and I don't think we're anywhere near this, but if it got to the point that either Pastrnak or Marchand or one of the top players and they had like a major issue, then the player's probably going to win that battle, I think. So we'll see where things go, but the Bruins certainly played much better this weekend. Like I said, it wasn't a Picasso, it wasn't the prettiest. They still have work to do, but at least they were better defensively, generally as a team, and goaltenders played well. Even though they didn't have a ton of shots and they didn't have their strongest opponents, they were on a back-to-back, but then again, so was Seattle. Anyways, it's good for them, but will they be able to keep it up? Can they take this to build off of? That's what we're going to have to wait and see. And in Seattle's case, they had a decent, they didn't have a great start to their season, but then they had a good run there where they won 3 in a row. And then I think they had an overtime loss not long after that. So they had a good stretch there, 4 or 5 games where they were, I think, at points at a 4 out of 5, and things were looking up for them. But then this whole road trip it started off good in Montreal with a big 8-2 win, and they had lost, I think, a game or two before that. But then big win in Montreal, but the last 3 have all been really rough. They lost 4-1 to the Maple Leafs, then they got shut out in Ottawa, and then they got shut out in Boston. So back-to-back shutouts. That's 1 goal in 3 games for the Seattle Kraken. And they're a team that needs to score by committee. A couple of years ago when they made the playoffs and knocked off the Avalanche, they had a lot of guys hitting career highs. They had a lot of guys with obscene shooting percentages. It was just one of those cases where everything went right and a lot of guys just were knocking it out of the park. And that's why last year I said, I don't think it's sustainable. That's unlikely that they're going to be able to duplicate that. And they didn't. They took a major step back last year. And really without making too crazy, they did make some changes. They added Stevenson and Montour. I just wasn't sure that it was enough to really propel them much forward. And then they had a good little run there. I was like, okay, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this team's better than I thought. But then the way we've seen the last 3 games is maybe I was right the first time, So we'll see what happens. Chano Stevenson's a really good player. I'm not sure that he can be the player he was in Vegas, though, with them. We'll see. And Brandon Montour, though, on the other hand, has been really, really good. So he's been, a good positive story. But overall, the team is struggling hardcore these last 3 games. This road trip can't get over soon enough for the Seattle Kraken. Now, as I mentioned, we got some rumors. We're going to talk about the Kraken some more. We're going to talk about the Habs, the Leafs, the Jackets. I want to start with Montreal because there was about a week ago, we talked about the fact that the reports out there from Elliot Friedman and a few other insiders that the Habs wanted to add a couple of things. They were exploring the D market because of injuries. We haven't really heard anything new there. And we heard, then after that came the news that they were looking for a forward, somebody who could play with an edge, not necessarily just a fighter, but like somebody who can be a nice, a good physical veteran presence is kind of what I took away from that. And there's been some takes around who that player could be. And about a week ago, we came up being Yanni Gourde in Seattle. Like, he's not a huge guy, but he plays a really hard style of game. Like, he's very energetic. He's tough to play against. He's got great experience, good leader. There's lots of he's a centerman. He can do well on faceoffs, all that kind of stuff. And then now again, just in the past couple of days, new reports from Renaud Lavoie of TVA Sports also proclaiming Yanni Gourde to the Habs, making a suggestion that it would be a great fit. Now, the article's written in French that he wrote, so, obviously I'm fully fluent in French, so I don't even bother translating half the time. But essentially makes it sound like, he really thinks Gourde would be a terrific fit, and that Gourde is very likely going to get traded by the Kraken sometime before the deadline. Now, the thing with Gourde, he is a pending UFA. He's making over $5 million a year, but the Habs could absorb that hit. Like, they're in a good situation cap-wise because of the LTIR pool that they have access to. He's won back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is, and he had some phenomenal years on cheaper contracts before he got this one. And then he got a long-term deal with the Lightning. So they won back-to-back cups. He was a huge part of that third line. At one point, he was line mates with Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman. They were phenomenal during the cup runs for the Lightning. Of course, and then they'll end up losing all parts of that line because they just couldn't afford to keep them. But Gourde went to Seattle in the expansion draft. He's got 3 years in now. Put up back-to-back 48-point seasons in his first 2 years. Last year, dropped to 33. He's got 3 assists so far this year. Hasn't scored yet. But like I said, good veteran guy. Plays a hard-nosed style of the game. He's from the province of Quebec, where he's a pending UFA. You could, by acquiring him, I don't think you'd have to give up a lot of assets because ultimately the Kraken right now are kind of struggling. They're probably going to end up selling off a guy like him who's a pending UFA, and it would be an opportunity for them to do like a trial run. Instead of targeting him in free agency, I don't think they'd have to give up a whole lot because for Seattle, it would be a way for them to kind of free up some cap space. If they do want to try to swap out or maybe make other moves, they wouldn't, where they don't need retention or nothing. It'd be an easy trade. It really would be. The article from TVA Sports and Renaud Lavoie also talks about the fact that Montreal will not be bringing back Christian Dvorak or Yoel Armia. Obviously, you'd like to move on from those players sooner than later if you can. Ultimately, I know the fans like to gripe a lot about the fact that under Marty St. Louis that there's still too many veterans that are kind of taking precedence here and getting more of an opportunity than some of the young players. And I've kind of said the same thing myself. It surprised me, and I think to some degree it's that there was no takers. It wasn't that Kent Hughes didn't try, but I honestly think Armia and Dvorak were very much on the market in the summertime, and there was nobody that really was serious about taking them. That's the problem. So they couldn't unload those contracts. Now, if they really aren't fond of their play and they really want to give those kids a chance to play ahead of them, they could put them on waivers, they have enough of a cap situation. They could figure this out. Lots of talk around Kirby Dach right now as well, but does he have a long-term future in Montreal? But that's a topic for another day. So, and ideally here, basically from the report from Lavoie, suggests that Dvorak and Armia are going to be gone sometime before the end of the year, if they can. If not, they're not back next year for sure. And Gourde is an ideal guy to bring in as a veteran guy to replace those guys who can give you better production, better leadership. He's a centerman, so he can give you good faceoffs, good PK, and just be a good overall, veteran, leader who can teach these guys how to win, because he's been there and done that. So we'll see. And he's a good story too, like a guy like Marty St. Louis, who's never had anything handed to him, had to go through things the hard way. He was a late bloomer in the NHL. I'm sure he's a player that St. Louis would have a lot in common with. Now, in Columbus, there's multiple reports suggesting that they are ready to make some moves, and that GM Don Waddell has been actively working the phones, although it can be challenging this time of year because a lot of teams are still trying to determine what they are and what's the identity, what's our odds for playoffs, that type of thing. So you don't usually see a lot of trading before you get to U.S. Thanksgiving. Then I find between U.S. Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's not like it's super busy, but things do pick up where you do tend to get a small, at least a decent amount of activity. Whether it be a little bit through waivers, a few small trades. You don't usually get the major ones, but you do get some activity. And then as the year goes on, you'll get a little more leading up to the grand finale at the NHL trade deadline, where we see the bulk of our activity here. So, obviously with $24 million in space, they're having probably a better than expected start to their season. Doesn't mean it's going to maintain that way. I don't think their big focus is right now getting on in playoffs. Their big focus right now is just trying to make this team better for the long run. They know there's lots of work to do. Essentially, with that space, the reports indicate they're willing to take on a bad or unfavorable contract. So clearly, looking around the NHL, there's a number of players and teams you can look at for potential partners for CBJ. Considering they've had a lot of injuries at the forward position and a lot of moving parts in and out, injuries and whatnot, that's probably going to be your primary area that you see them maybe target. As we just talked about, Montreal's got a couple, so I do wonder about guys like Armia and Dvorak. But they're, again, what are they going to want for an asking price? We'll take this player on, but what are you going to give me to do it? And that's just really going to boil down to what we see for a move. So not only would they be a good fit and target with Montreal, but I also look to the Maple Leafs. Like I said, they have Hakanpää and Dufour on a conditioning stint with the American Hockey League. Now the Marlies have I think it's 6 days off after this weekend. So, the Leafs can take their time because they don't have to recall these players. They can play up to 3 games down there, so they can stay down there all week on paper, right? So they don't need to rush this decision at all. But within the next week, they are going to likely have those guys, if everything goes well, be recalled. And not long after that, you still got Järnkrok that's working his way back. They're going to have to make some moves. Now, we've heard about Matt Benning. Ellie Friedman says that they want to do right by the player, and they intend to find him an opportunity. It doesn't sound like they're planning to keep him, that they want to do right by him and find a spot where he can be a regular NHL player, because really, in all honesty, he can be a third-pair defenseman on a decent amount of teams out there. So clearly lots of teams are looking for D. They're trying to find a spot they could get him to be able to play. So that's one player, but I don't think that's necessarily a player for Columbus per se. But looking at the Leafs, with all these other healthy bodies coming back soon, what about Nick Robertson? What's going to happen with him? Now, he'd probably be a player that would intrigue the Blue Jackets, where he's a little bit younger, could get a bigger role and maybe fit in with their young crew, but he's got 1 goal in the season in 10 games. He's sat out a couple times for a healthy scratch. Is things really working out for Robertson? I know he was holding out, didn't want to play there anymore, wanted a fresh start, didn't get it. The Leafs didn't want to give up on him yet. They convinced him to sign a 1-year deal, and he looked good in the preseason. But the preseason, there's a reason why it doesn't count, because you're not playing full NHL rosters night after night, and it's just not the same. Teams are not putting their full lineups out, and secondly, players are not playing to the full effort that you would normally get. So it's not the same thing at all. That's why you can't put too much stock into it, no matter how good somebody looks. Sometimes it translates, sometimes it doesn't, and a lot of times it doesn't. So obviously Robertson's another name I think you could probably fair to watch as well when it comes to maybe Columbus, with the Leafs needing to make room for returning healthy bodies. I'm not sure that he's got a full future ahead of him in Toronto. I would have thought, based on how the season, when it was starting, I was like, okay, maybe this is going to be a breakout year for Robertson, and it's best that he stays. But then after everything we've seen so far, it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe they do part with him, right? So we'll see. And then back to Seattle, not only Gourde is a name out there to watch, but Brandon Tanev is another player that was in the rumor mill in the offseason, didn't end up getting moved. I think there was some interest, but not enough to pull the trigger. And I don't know that he's a player that is going to be brought back. I think Seattle, if you look at like Shane Wright. He's been playing a lot of third-line minutes. He's got 2 points on the season. That's concerning for me. You need to get Shane Wright into a better offensive role, or you're really hurting his development, in my opinion. I think I can see them moving on from a couple of veterans to try to, reorganize their forward group so that Shane Wright can move up. And, you can say that maybe he hasn't earned it, but he's getting power play time too. I've seen the last couple of Kraken games where they've been on, obviously where they've been on this East Coast tour. I've seen a little bit more of them than I normally get with the West Coast time difference. Sometimes it's challenging to stay up super late and watch them play. But with Wright, I don't know. I'm not. It's still too early, in my opinion, to call him a bust. But it's concerning that they signed Chandler Stevenson to a long-term, big money deal, and they got Beniers extended on a fairly expensive deal. So where's Shane Wright going to play? The way they paid Stevenson, I don't think they see him eventually becoming the number 3 center, because then Shane Wright needs to, let's say that he gets top 6 minutes and has a bit of a breakthrough, and then you want to sign him to a bigger deal. You're not going to do that, right? So I don't know where Wright fits unless you see him moving to the wing in the top 6. It's a little bit concerning. So I'm not sure. I do wonder. I think it's early for them to trade him, but I wonder what the future holds there. But in all honesty, Gourde and Tanev are a couple of guys to watch. Gourde makes sense for Montreal. Tanev does to some degree as well, but I do think Columbus would be a landing spot possibly for him. Columbus is also, wouldn't be completely shocked. Another name that was mentioned in an article as well for Columbus, it might be Andre Burakovsky, but he's got multiple years left. I don't know that they're going to want to take on that much term. So we'll have to wait and see. But Columbus is willing to take on some not great money if they can get some good sweeteners with it. Of course, like I said, the Habs looking for that, forward with an edge. Want to unload some of their veterans themselves. I know that Dvorak and Armia are not really impressing anybody. Josh Anderson, to some degree, I think is ready, for the fan base at least, ready to move on from too. And then we got Matt Benning in Toronto. I don't know. We'll see a lot of activity this coming week, but we know based on reports that a lot of teams the conversations are being had. They're trying. So I'll be curious to see when we finally start to get some more activity. We had a good little flurry there in the past week. Wonder when we'll get some more. Let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.